Hello, this is chapter 7, Hosteen, Klah, Navajo Medicine Man and Sand Painter. This book can be purchased from Amazon. So taking a look at chapter 7 is titled Home and Family. They had parted with Zilchana Yeje, her foster mother, and their family group at Fort Defiance. These relatives were continuing their journey into Arizona to locate at their old home sites near Chejin and to find Zilchana's brother, Chetul Kohi, who had not gone to Huelde and now owned many sheep and ponies. Slim Woman was sad to see him leave without her, but she now had a family and must go to the land that was hers by inheritance. When they arrived at the meadow of Nayet, they found nothing left of the hogans, brush shelters, or corrals her parents had built, although outlines of the hills and dikes could still be seen. They did not remain here because there were too many ghosts connected with this place, but continued to the pleasant swell a few miles away where a sheep corral had been located. They named this place Debehbegan, and here they built 3 hogans in a larger sheep corral. Since the snow of the higher mountain slopes was melting rapidly and they needed farm seeds before this irrigation water was all gone, the aunt, who was the daughter of Narbonna's Zuni wife, went to the Zuni Pueblo, and her brother, whose father was a Hopi, went to the Hopi Pueblo, both taking part of the trade goods they had been given at Fort Defiance to trade for seeds. Hoshke Noye had several horses and a flock of sheep, but he did not possess a wagon, so they all traveled on horseback while waiting for the siege. Ashke and his helpers built corrals and dikes, dug irrigation ditches, and flooded his fields. As soon as the water sank into the ground and the seeds had been blessed, he would start the spring planting. It was the Navajo custom to plant the seeds in fairly deep holes, which would not dry up soon. The man of the family walked ahead and made the holes with the planting stick. His wife followed close behind with a blanket full of seeds and dropped a handful into each hole, then brushed earth over them with her foot. The yield was thought to be greater than the seeds were planted by a woman. The spring was dry and cold, followed by a very hot summer. The corn and beans did not do well, and in the autumn, the harvest was scarcely enough to last them through the winter. After another year of hard work and partial crop failure, they were quite discouraged. The next spring, a baby boy was born to Slim Woman. He was fat and healthy and lived to be a year old, then suddenly died. In the morning, the baby was all right when she nursed it and then tied it to the cradle board. But at noon, when her aunt wondered why it was so still and went to pick it up, it had stopped breathing. Its face was a molted gray. Its mouth was open and its tongue had turned black. Slim Woman and her aunt immediately blamed its death on a medicine man who was holding a ceremony not far away. She said, "Those medicine men carry poison darts. They can shoot through the air anywhere to kill children and babies." After this, there were no more children. At this time, all trade was with trading posts located at Fort Wingate and Fort Defiance near military protection, or with the Jemez and Isleta Indians who traded with the settlers along the Rio Grande. They traded silver, dollars, and turquoise to the Navajo for sheep and goats. And Gallup, Flagstaff, and other towns along the Santa Fe Trail had not come into being. There were no missions or missionaries nearer than Isleta, but there was some Mormon colonies to the south and west of the reservation. Several Mormon men married Navajo women and came to live among the Navajos. Some of these were Petite, red hair, Wane, Hosteen, Zilkai, Hoskeye, and Peshlokai, who was a Mexican silversmith and used silver dollars to make jewelry. All of these seem to have built their home somewhere in the Tunicha Mountains and their descendants bearing the same names are still located there. After the death of her baby, Slim woman Hushkay Nolia did not wish to remain at Nayet Sayet. So Hushkay located a farm in the Tunicha Valley a few miles below the mesa where Slim woman's grandfather Narbona had been shot by the soldiers. They did not build a permanent house there, but dug a irrigation ditch, enclosed a few acres with dikes, and cleared the ground of brush and roots. After the fields had been flooded and planted, they went back into the Tunicha Mountains behind Torlina and built 3 hogans at a place called Deschitni de Klah, which means Pinyon Forest. One house was for Slim Woman's aunt and uncle, another for themselves, and the third for her brother, who was now married. A mountain rail ran down a nearby canyon and up the cliffs. At the head of the same canyon were hidden caves, which furnished hiding places when Ute raiders came across the San Juan River. The United States soldiers had been taken from Fort Defiance and Fort Wingate and transported east to fight the Civil War, so the Navajo families with no means of defense were completely at the mercy of roving bands of Utes and Apaches. These raiders were sold the captured women and children to the Mexican for slaves and in return received horses and cattle. There was not much danger of raids during the winter or spring months, so Hushkay and Olie family built snug adobe hogans near Black Dyke Springs in the lower Tunicha Valley and brought their livestock there, where the tall grass would furnish grazing for the winter months. These hogans were covered with native adobe and so resembles the earth and nearby rocks that they blended into the landscape and were practically invisible at any distance. In the spring, they built brush shelters near the fields and lived there until the planting was finished. Then these shelters were destroyed. All evidence of their residence in that place was obliterated. And the family with flocks and household goods moved to their summer home in Deschitni. During the summer, many trips were made to the cornfields to hoe the weeds and to make the best use of irrigation water when the summer rains fill the arroyos and the ditches. At the time, Tunicha Creek, later to be known as Captain Tom's Wash, carried more water than it does now. Snow melting on the mountains filled it with water from March, when irrigating began, until late in May. June was a dry month and the water in the creek was reduced to a trickle, but July was a month of summer storms that often turned the creek into a raging torrent, which overflowed its banks and turned the lower meadows into lakes. Through August and autumn months, there were rains on the mountains, which furnished the creek with a constant stream. During harvest season, Slim Woman and her family again built shelters near the fields where they could live while harvesting their crops. Again, pits were dug some distance from the fields. Corn, beans, and squash were stored, and the place was carefully camouflaged. She did not mention guard stations to the north to warn them of approaching raiders, but there may have been. She did not tell of one time when they were sent word that a party of Utes were traveling toward them, and there was not time to reach a hiding place in the mountains. Her husband said it would be better to travel towards the Utes than away from them. So they and all the other Navajos working there put their shoes on backward and traveled all night towards the north. They walked in single file and stepped in each other's tracks as nearly as possible. Before daylight arrived, they were all hidden behind the bank of the Big Bend in the Tenastit Canyon. The Utes rode south to the Tunicha Valley, burned all the hogans, killed as many sheep as they could, and had a feast of corn, melons, mutton. When they discovered the trail of a fugitive, it was too late to catch them, for the Navajos had fled on the mountains and were safely hidden. Years passed and changes came to the Navajo reservation. Schools were built and agencies established. Missionaries erected missions at various places, and trading posts were built, first near these schools and then in a network that spread over the entire reservation. Navajo hand-woven blankets were much in demand and became one of their main sources of income. Slim Woman, who who was known as a sanso or large woman, had learned from her Hopi father to spin the wool into fine, hard twisted yarn and to weave it into a brightly patterned rug. These finer rugs brought in the highest prices after her aunt died. The sanso taught her son Klah and her daughter Adejba to weave in the same manner, but she never trusted them to spin the yarn. Her reputation as an expert spinner lasted as long as she could see, and most of the yarn Hosteen Klah used in his sand painting rugs was spun by his mother. Peace and prosperity had come to Astanso and her family. Hoshke Nolier bought a wagon, a plow, and a number of cattle. The flock of sheep owned by the family group number more than 1,000, besides 100 or more goats, each bringing at lambing time. Hoshke gave each of his children a number of lambs in which to start their own flocks. During the many years they were together, the Hoshke Nolier family were among the most important and respected people on the reservation. In 1914, when I first met Grandma Klah, she was 69 years old, but as strong and active as many women of 40. She lived in a hogan near that of her daughter, Adeshba, who had been married twice and had 4 daughters. Why none of these daughters had ever been sent to government boarding schools, I do not know. Grandma Klah still owned 200 or 300 sheep and was still an industrious weaver. Many Navajo families brought their wool to her to be spun into weaving yarn, and in return, she was given some of the wool as payment for her labor. She herded not only her own sheep, but also the entire flock belonged to her family. I can still see her trudging behind the noisy flock, slightly bent in a bit lame, swinging a long stick to the end of which was tied a tin can filled with pebbles, which she used as bottle rattle and cane. She not only helped with the herding, but also with the shearing. When the wool clip was brought to the post to be weighed and sold, she came with the others and counted out her share of the silver dollars, fleece by fleece. After placing part of the silver in a money bag, which she concealed under her full skirt, she piled the remaining dollars into equal piles, one for each member of her family. Then she sat comfortably on the floor and watched while they proceeded to spend her money. Early in the 1920s, her daughter Adejba was thrown from her horse and suffered a dislocated shoulder and a broken collarbone. Her shoulder may have been fractured, for not long afterwards, a wen as large as a goose egg appeared on her back. 2 or 3 healing ceremonies were held for her, but none removed the wen or gave her back the use of that arm. Finally, an old medicine man who sang the knife chant was called, and after a 5-day ceremony, the wen was gone and she slowly regained partial use of her arm. Just how the old chanter removed the wen, I was never able to find out, but Navajo medicine men do perform minor surgery when the occasion requires. Grandma Klah took care of her daughter through this illness, assuming all of the extra work along with her own tasks until Adejba was fully recovered. But the injured arm was always stiff, and Adejba could not card or spin the wool, although she could still dye the yarn and help with the weaving. As the years passed, Grandma Klah gave more and more of her sheep to her grandchildren and had it understood that when she was gone, Evelyn should have all that remained. Evelyn was a baby when her mother died of flu, and Grandma Klah had taken her to raise, so she was her favorite granddaughter. There never seemed to be any jealousy about this among the others. The consensus of opinion seemed to be that the sheep belong to Grandma and she has the right to give them to whomever she pleases. One day, Grandma Klah came to our post with a rug to sell. When the purchase price had been agreed upon, she carefully counted her silver dollar and then paid for a double string of coral beads she had placed in pawn several months before. With the remainder of the money, she first bought shoes for Evelyn and then brought dark blue velvet for a blouse, many yards of black satin for a full skirt and a beautiful long fringe Pendleton shawl. She bargained for each article separately, counting her money over and over after each purchase. When I asked her granddaughter if grandma was planning to have a ceremony held for her, she answered no, she will pay us for making these clothes for her. Then she will put them away for burial garments so she can enter the next world well dressed. Although she always had plenty of food, grandma ate sparingly for the many years of semi-starvation, never were forgotten. She was never happy unless she was busy at some useful task, herding sheep, caring for babies, hoeing corn, carding, weaving, or spinning. She was never idle. When cataracts at last nearly covered her eyes, she could not follow the sheep or hoe the corn. She wove her last blanket at the age of 82 when she was partially blind. Her granddaughters strung the warp on the loom and gave her black and white wool to use, as she could still distinguish between light and dark. It was not well woven and the pattern was uneven, but I kept it as one of my prized possessions until it was burned in the fire that destroyed our trading post. One of her granddaughters had died during the flu epidemic of 1919, but grandma taught the remaining three to spin fine yarn and weave compact blankets that brought high prices and were always in demand. The two older girls, Miss Sam and Miss Jim, were later wove sand painting blankets under the direction of their uncle, Hosteen Klah, and these are preserved in museums in many parts of the United States. The younger girl, Daisy Hagal, she became noted as the best weaver on the Navajo reservation. On September 14, 1935, this article appeared in the Southwest Tourist News, a paper published in Gallup, New Mexico by M.L. Woodard. Grandma Klah on the 17th of August, Grandma Klah, who might rightfully have claimed the title of Navajo princess, closed her eyes in the last long sleep. If she had lived until August 31st, she would have been 90 years old. Crippled, blind, and deaf, she was mentally alert until the day of her death, and although quite helpless, was well cared for, loved, and respected by her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The family who survived her passing comprised of one son, Hosteen Klah, a noted medicine man, one daughter, three granddaughters, several great-grandchildren, and one great-great-grandson. Grandma Klah was born in the summer. The United States made the Newby Treaty with the Navajo Indians. She was 4 years old when her grandfather and noted Chief Narbona, whose Navajo name was Natonitso, was shot and killed by the soldiers of the Simpson expedition. Grandma Klah was a tall maiden called Slim Girl, and later known as Astantso, meaning large woman. During the last years of her life, her thoughts traveled back to her girlhood, to the scenes and events of a past generation. She told of traveling 4 days with her mother and father to Fort Wingate in order to see if the people stationed there were really white. She told of the Utes and the soldiers who raided her father's flock and fields, forcing the family to live in a hidden canyon in Rock Mesa. She told of the journey to the Bosque Redondo and her experience while there, and then the return to a ravaged homeland. Always she completed these tales with a weary sigh and the words, "It was a long walk." And so with the passing of Grandma Klah, one of the most dramatic eras of Navajo history came to a close. Wow, that was really powerful. So that will actually complete part 2. Part 3 will start with the next recording. So I hope you enjoy this. Thank you and have a good day.